Lake Tahoe's water level has dropped to a 4-year low. It was hovering around the natural rim, but this week it fell just below it.
You can now take a hike in the water of beautiful Lake Tahoe. California state parks have developed Tahoe's first underwater trail. It's called the Emerald Bay State Park Maritime Heritage Trail. And it includes 4 different sites showcasing sunken historic boats.
Millions of people visit Lake Tahoe every year, captivated by its crystal clear water and breathtaking mountain scenery. From the surface, it looks peaceful, almost flawless. But hidden thousands of feet below is a world that has inspired chilling legends, baffled researchers, and remained out of reach for generations. Before we reveal what the cameras discovered at the bottom of Lake Tahoe, hit like and subscribe, because the deeper this investigation went, the stranger the truth became. Just after sunrise, at 6:42 in the morning, a research submersible quietly slipped beneath the lake's mirror-like surface. For the first few moments, the water was so incredibly clear that the vehicle's reflection seemed to be descending alongside it. Shafts of golden sunlight stretched deep into the lake before slowly fading into darkness. As the submersible continued its descent, it passed beyond the depth where any diver could safely survive and headed toward a lakebed surrounded by mystery. For more than a century, stories have claimed that Lake Tahoe has no true bottom, while others insist its freezing depths preserve everything that sinks into them. When the cameras finally reached the floor, the footage raised questions that still haven't been fully answered. For 100 years, no one could prove any of it. The lake kept its secret, the way it keeps everything: cold, silent, music, and out of reach. But that was about to change, because for the first time, machines were going all the way to the bottom, and the cameras were rolling. What they recorded did change everything. Music, just not in the way the legends promised. Segment 2. What the lake actually is. Let's start with what the lake actually is, because the truth is more staggering than the folklore, and it explains exactly why those stories ever took hold. Lake Tahoe sits high in the Sierra Nevada, straddling the border of California and Nevada, cradled in a basin carved by faults and polished by ancient glaciers. From the shore, it looks almost gentle, a wide blue mirror ringed by pine and granite, ski slopes rising behind the beaches. But that surface is a lie about the size of the thing underneath it. Tahoe is one of the deepest lakes on the entire continent. At its deepest measured point, the floor lies roughly 1,645 feet below the surface. Say that number slowly, and it still doesn't quite register. So try it a different way. The Empire State Building, from the sidewalk to the tip of its antenna, stands about 1,454 feet tall. Drop that entire skyscraper into the deepest part of Lake Tahoe, and the top of it would still be nearly 200 feet underwater. You could stack it and stand a person on the roof, and they would never break the surface. Or picture the Eiffel Tower, 1,000 feet of iron lattice that dominates the Paris skyline. Sink it into Tahoe, and it wouldn't even reach 2/3 of the way down. There is that much water here, somewhere on the order of 39 trillion gallons of it, enough to cover the entire state of California, more than a foot deep. It is not a lake in the way a summer pond is a lake. It is closer to a small, cold, freshwater sea, holding its own weather, its own currents, its own crushing pressure in the dark below. Segment 3. The cold below. And it is the dark below that matters, because as that survey vehicle continued down through the golden columns of light, something began to happen on the monitor that anyone who has ever swum in a warm ocean would find deeply unsettling. The gold thinned, the blue deepened, and the temperature reading on the side of the screen, which had started at a pleasant 60-something degrees near the summer surface, music began to fall. And then it stopped falling and simply held. This is the part of Tahoe that grew the legends, and it is completely real. In the surface layer, the lake warms in summer and cools in winter, behaving like water everywhere. But there is a boundary, somewhere below 300 feet, past which the seasons stop, meaning anything at all. Beneath that line, the water sits at a near constant temperature all year long, hovering just above 39 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature at which fresh water is at its densest and heaviest, and therefore sinks and stays. It does not warm in July. It does not freeze in January. It simply holds in perpetual motionless cold, in perpetual absolute dark. Below about 700 feet, sunlight is gone entirely, not dim, gone. A camera down there sees nothing at all until it turns on its own lights, and even then, the beam only carves a small tunnel of visibility out of an ink-black nothing that stretches in every direction. And here is why the preserved body story sounds so convincing to anyone who hears the physics. In warm, oxygen-rich, bacteria-filled water, things break down fast. Wood rots, metal corrodes, a body decomposes in days. But in cold like this, near freezing, still and starved of oxygen, that whole process slows to a crawl. Bacteria that need warmth and air can barely function. Decomposition does not stop completely, but it drags out over spans of time that stop making intuitive sense. So the claim took root that things which sink into the deep cold of Tahoe do not decay the way they should, that a shoe, a boat, a body could sit down there on that black floor for decades or even centuries, looking very much the way they did the day the water swallowed them. It is a chilling idea, and it is grounded in just enough truth to be impossible to laugh off. So the storytellers ran with it. They took the real depth, the real cold, the real preservation, and they built a mythology on top of it. A mythology of standing corpses and untouched suits, and a diver too frightened to speak. For generations, no one could go down and check. The depth alone made it a place of the imagination, rather than of evidence. But imagination has a way of hardening into something people swear is fact, and by the time the survey vehicles finally descended, half the region believed there was a graveyard waiting in the dark. Segment 4. The Cousteau Legend. One of the most enduring legends about Jacques Cousteau has helped shape the mystery of Lake Tahoe for decades. According to the story, Cousteau explored the lake's dark depths in the 1970s and later emerged deeply shaken. The legend claims that when asked what he had seen, he simply replied, "The world isn't ready for what's down there." It's a dramatic quote that has fueled countless books, videos, and online discussions. But here's the important part. There is no verified evidence that Cousteau ever said those words. No interview, recording, document, or reliable source has confirmed the quote. In fact, there is also no confirmed record that he made the legendary deep dive often described in the story. Even so, the quote continues to spread because it's memorable and mysterious. Over time, it became the foundation for many of the lake's most famous myths, inspiring stories about hidden creatures, preserved bodies, and secret discoveries beneath the water. That doesn't mean Lake Tahoe isn't fascinating. It truly is. Its extreme depth and cold temperatures make it one of the most mysterious lakes in North America. But separating documented facts from popular legends allows us to appreciate the real mystery even more. Sometimes the most powerful stories survive not because they're proven, but because they capture our imagination. Segment 5. Why no one could look for most of the lake's history, that was impossible. And understanding exactly why is what makes the survey feel like such a threshold moment because the same conditions that fed the legend are the same conditions that keep human beings out. Deep diving anywhere is dangerous. Deep diving here is a special category of lethal, and it stacks its hazards in ways that surprise even experienced divers. First, there is the raw depth. The floor of the deepest basin sits well beyond 1,000 feet, and recreational scuba diving becomes deadly long before that. Most divers have no business past 130 feet, where nitrogen begins to act on the brain like a slow anesthetic. Push deeper, and the pressure crushes in. The gases in your blood turn treacherous, and every foot down multiplies the time and precision required to come back up alive. Then there is the cold. That near-freezing water beneath the boundary layer does not just chill you, it strips the heat from a human body with brutal efficiency, and even in a sealed dry suit, time in that dark becomes a countdown. And then, layered on top of both, there is a factor most people never think about: altitude. Lake Tahoe sits more than 6,000 feet above sea level. The air is thinner up there, and the physics of pressure and gas that every dive table is built on shift accordingly. A dive that would be routine at the coast becomes an equation with a narrower margin of error up in the mountains, where the surface itself is already high. Depth, cold, and altitude, braided together. It is a place engineered almost to keep the living out and to keep its floor unseen. So for generations, the bottom of Tahoe stayed exactly where the myth wanted it. In the imagination, beyond reach, unfalsifiable. You could believe whatever you liked about it, because no one could go down and prove you wrong. And that is precisely the vacuum that machines were built to fill. If a human body cannot survive the descent, you send something that has no body to lose. You send sonar, pulses of sound, fired down into the dark, timed as they bounce back. Each returning echo a single point of measurement that, gathered by the millions, can be stitched into a map of a shape no eye has ever seen whole. And you send remotely operated vehicles, tethered robots, trailing cables back up to a boat on the surface, carrying lights and cameras and instruments down into the cold on your behalf, feeding everything they see back up the line to a bank of glowing monitors, where human beings sit warm and dry and watch. That is the quiet revolution at the heart of this entire story. Not a brave diver, not a submersible carrying a shaken explorer, a methodical, patient, unglamorous sweep, a survey running grid, lines back and forth across the whole basin, the way a farmer plows a field, mapping every foot of a floor that legend insisted could not be mapped because it did not exist. The people running it were not hunting for corpses. They were doing music science, charting the shape of the basin, studying its slopes and sediment, understanding the lake as a living system. But whether they intended it or not, music, the moment those pulses started returning clean, measurable echoes from a solid bottom, they had already begun to dismantle the oldest myth of all. Segment 6. The Drowned Forest. As the remotely operated vehicle, ROV, slipped beneath the crystal-clear waters of Lake Tahoe, everything looked almost unreal. The water was so clear that for the first few dozen feet, the cameras captured every pebble, every ripple of sunlight, and every detail of the lake bed. It looked more like looking through glass than looking underwater. But as the ROV continued its descent, the scene slowly began to change. The brilliant blue faded, sunlight weakened, and colors gradually disappeared. By the time the vehicle reached a few hundred feet below the surface, its powerful lights had become the only source of illumination. Beyond that beam of light was nothing but deep, silent darkness. Then the cameras revealed something no one expected. Standing on the lake bed were entire trees, not fallen logs or scattered branches, but upright trunks, rooted exactly where they had once grown. Some still had skeletal branches reaching upward, creating the unmistakable appearance of an ancient underwater forest. The discovery stunned the team. Seeing a standing tree at the bottom of a deep lake feels almost impossible, yet there they were. The cold, oxygen-poor water had preserved the wood remarkably well. Later studies suggested some of these trees could be around 6,000 years old, making them older than the pyramids of Egypt. Their presence tells an incredible story. Trees cannot grow underwater, which means this land was once dry. Thousands of years ago, the water level in Lake Tahoe must have been much lower, allowing a forest to thrive where hundreds of feet of water exist today. Even more intriguing is how the trees remained standing. A sudden flood would likely have knocked them over or swept them away. Instead, they stayed rooted in place, suggesting the lake rose gradually over a long period, slowly submerging the forest without destroying it. As the ROV continued its journey into the depths, the ghostly forest slowly disappeared from view, fading back into the darkness where it had remained hidden for thousands of years. Segment 7. The cluster on the sonar 400 feet, 500. The water was total night now, and the only sensory world left was the one the machine manufactured. The white cone of the lights, the green wash of the sonar display, the numbers, and the faint, steady tick of the tether feeding out. In that control room, warm and dry and bright, it was easy to forget, for whole minutes at a time, that everything they were watching existed in a place that would kill an unprotected person in the time it takes to read this sentence. The ordinary comfort of the monitors sat right up against the extraordinary hostility of what they showed. Somewhere past 600 feet, the sonar operators leaned in. Music. They had been running clean grid lines, watching the floor resolve tile by tile into the first true map anyone had ever made of this basin. And something in the returns had changed. The soft, even signature of sediment had given way to a scatter of harder echoes, shapes small and distinct. Music, clustered where the smooth data said there should only be silt. On a sonar screen, a cluster of hard returns is not yet a story. It could be rock, it could be a rock slide, it could be 100 perfectly ordinary things that a lake bed accumulates over 10,000 years. But it could, in the frame that every old Tahoe legend had trained people to fear, be something else entirely. And for the length of time it took to steer the vehicle over for a closer look, no one in that room was willing to say out loud what shapes at 600 feet, clustered together on the floor of a lake famous for hiding its dead, might turn out to be. So they held their breath, and they sent the lights down toward the cluster, and they watched the black water slowly give up its edges, one grey shape at a time. What the lights found. And what the lights found, when the ROV finally hung over that cluster and steadied itself in the current, was not a body. It was not 9 bodies arranged in a deliberate ring, and it was not a single man in a 1940s suit, standing upright with his eyes open and a pocket watch ticking against his ribs. The white cones settled, the sediment glowed, and the hard returns resolved into shapes that were almost insulting in how ordinary they were. Bottles, cans, a tangle of what might once have been fishing gear, fused now into a single knotted mass by decades of cold and pressure, a tire, the corner of something rusted flat and unreadable. Trash, 600 feet down, in one of the clearest, most protected lakes on the continent. The survey had steered its lights toward the darkest legend Tahoe owned, and it had found garbage. You could hear it in the control room. That particular silence that follows a held breath released. Not disappointment exactly, something more complicated. Because the machine had just done the one thing the legends could never survive. It had looked plainly and completely at the place the story said held the dead, and it had found only the things the living had thrown away. This was the moment that the whole enterprise turned, and it turned quietly, the way real revelations usually do. There was no leaked tape, there was no frantic call to the authorities, no site sealed off, no cluster of human silhouettes that some diver would whisper about for the rest of his life. There was a comprehensive sonar map, built line by patient line, and there were hours of ROV footage, and together they said something that 100 years of folklore had never wanted to hear. Tahoe is not bottomless. It has a bottom, and that bottom is now mapped in more detail than most people's own neighborhoods. And the bottom does not hold a field of perfectly preserved corpses hovering upright in the cold. The refrigerator effect is real, but the Cathedral of the Dead, that legend built inside it, simply was music not there. The cameras looked everywhere a body was supposed to be, and they found the lake bed instead. Segment 10, what the survey actually found. But the survey did find something. That is the part that lands harder than any monster could, because it is true, and because it is ours. Across the mapped floor of Lake Tahoe, in the shallows, and out into the deep blue, and down into the cold black, the cameras recorded litter. Not a curiosity, not a stray bottle, a startling accumulating scatter of human debris, glass and aluminum and plastic music, and sunken junk. Decades of it, resting on the sediment of a lake that people drive hundreds of miles to stand beside and call pristine. The very cold and stillness that the legends promised would preserve bodies had instead preserved our garbage, holding it intact and legible on the floor of one of the most beautiful lakes in North America. That is the truth the machines carried up the tether. Tahoe is not a vault of the dead. It is a vault of what we didn't bother to carry back out. And in its own quiet way, that is more unsettling than the ghost story. A monster you can fear from a safe distance. A field of preserved corpses is a legend that asks nothing of you but a shiver. But a floor scattered with bottles and cans is a mirror, and it does not let you look away, because every piece down there came from a hand like yours, on a boat or ashore, on an ordinary summer day. The survey that was supposed to confirm the darkest myths of Tahoe ended up confirming something plainer and far more demanding, that the lake has been quietly swallowing our carelessness for generations and holding on to every piece. What came after that finding did not vanish into a filing cabinet. It became the reason for the work that followed, the effort used to guide cleanup, to send divers and machines back down, not to hunt for the dead, but to haul up what the living left, bottle by bottle, tire by tire, from a floor that finally, for the first time, someone could actually see. The myths dissolved, but the responsibility they'd been hiding did not. So the old questions can rest now. The lake has a measured floor. It is not a graveyard of standing corpses. It is a graveyard of our litter. The Cousteau warning was never spoken by the man it's pinned to. The drowned forest is real and genuinely strange, still standing at its silent attention 6,000 years on, and the honest answer to how it got there is simply that we don't fully know yet, which is a far better mystery than a made-up one, because it's true, and someone reading this might one day help solve it. The Washoe held this basin sacred for longer than any of the stories that came later, and their reverence for its water reads very differently now, less like superstition and more like the oldest and clearest instruction anyone ever gave about this place, that it deserves care. The bottom of Lake Tahoe held no bodies and no monster. It held the trees we didn't plant, the past we can't yet explain, and the trash we did leave. The cameras went down expecting a legend and came back with a mirror. Now it's your turn. Have you ever heard the stories that Lake Tahoe was bottomless, or that its deep, icy waters were hiding mysterious secrets? And after seeing what modern exploration has actually revealed, has your perspective changed? One thing is clear. Alongside its natural beauty, the lake also contains decades of discarded trash that has slowly accumulated beneath the surface. Protecting this remarkable place is just as important as uncovering its mysteries. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoy exploring hidden places, ancient mysteries, and discoveries from the deepest parts of our planet, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. There's always another mystery waiting just below the surface.